Podcasters Roundtable, round 66, standardizing audience measurement. Yeah, big mouthful there, but I'll read the text as I typically do a write-up, so I might as well not waste it. I might as well just read it here. But so I said, in the lead up to this, do you know how many people listen or watch your podcast? Do you have stats? Are they accurate? Would you even know if they weren't? So podcast audience measurement can be tricky, and we definitely have some people on the panel that can speak to that. And maybe even some people that are on the panel but out of the shot. I think I saw some highly trained experts in the room. That might come in handy. But most of us, we leave the task to our podcast media host or some other third-party stat tracking service. I myself use Libsyn, so I get my stats there. But how do Libsyn, PodTrack, Blueberry, how do they measure stats and who's doing it most accurately? So there are actually a bunch of companies and I guess member groups, we'll call them, who have been working on podcast audience measurement since podcasts began pretty much. We'll hear a little bit more about that. But not everyone agrees on how that should be done. So I guess in other words, not everyone counts downloads the same, right? All right, well, let's get to the panel. This is kind of cool. We have basically the New Media Show meets Podcasters Roundtable mashup today. But I think we've had this lineup before. Yeah, we could have a battle royale maybe. That would be good. I mean, that's a different round. That would be great. We'll have to do that in Vegas, and we'll duke it out for podcast dominance. But starting off back with co-hosting duties, Mr. Daniel J. Lewis. Daniel J. Lewis, welcome back.
Thank you very much. I am excited, I think, more to listen in this roundtable than to speak.
Well, as the roundtable goes, you cruise along, you listen, and then you need to just butt in. When something doesn't make sense, that'll be, I guess, our main charge today. Clear that up. Co-host Dave Jackson, welcome back, buddy.
Yeah, I'm with Daniel. I'm going to play the role of the average Joe podcaster today, and hopefully ask the questions that they're thinking as we kind of hash this out a little bit. So looking forward to it.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, you got to help me out. Like, I don't want to be solo here. I do have an outline, but we'll probably have so much to talk about. It'll be hard to get a word in, but we'll figure it out. Because these guys, I mean, the New Media Show, which I love, is like 90 minutes, an hour. It's never long enough, to be honest with you, but I will talk more about that. Rob Greenlee, no stranger to the roundtable. Welcome back.
It's great to be here. It's great to have this lineup. These bunch of great guys, been around the podcasting space a long time. So it's always great to join you guys on the roundtable.
Yeah, good geek out session.
That's right.
And of course, we always catch him on the road. It seems, Mr. Todd Cochrane, welcome back.
Hey, it's glad to be here. And I'll be honest with you, I arrived in Chicago and it's getting colder, so I'm enjoying the cold weather for a few days out of Honolulu here doing a team meeting for Raw Voice.
Yeah, rough life. He's got to go from Honolulu for a few days to endure the cold of the Midwest and the people stuck back there. So we look forward to having Chicago punish you for a couple days, and then you can go back to Hawaii. All right. Well, you can see there is no new roundtabler this time, so I'm kind of breaking my own rules, but that's okay because, I mean, podcasting should be all about breaking the rules, but there's kind of no rules to break. Maybe only best practices, perhaps standards. Oh, that's a bad joke. All right. Why did I choose this topic? Well, I mean, recently there was news about public radio. I guess, what are they even called? Who are these people? Are they an actual group? Is this an informal group? I don't know. But public radio got together, whatever that means, seemingly in private, to create their own document outlining standards for podcast measurement. And actually, it doesn't seem they did a horrible job on that, but it seems like they sort of tried to reinvent the wheel without involving a lot of input from sort of long-established standards that we've had in place for a long time in podcasting. So, I mean, most podcasters probably don't even know that there's been a history of various groups who've actually set out to create standards on which we can measure podcast listening. Maybe you didn't even know that was happening. I mean, it all kind of feels behind the curtain. So hopefully we'll peel back a little bit about that. And if you don't know, you'll know a lot more when we leave this roundtable. But I wanted to get together, talk about those things, what's going on sort of behind the scenes. What do standards mean basically for the average podcaster? I would say most people listening to this, but the indie podcaster, those who on average, they don't even have an audience size that would benefit from what I would say is current CPM rates, which I think these standards help dictate. So, I mean, ad rates are what these standards are all about. Are they, Todd? Is that what this is all about when we're talking about creating standards?
Well, what it really boils down to is making sure that the media buyer gets what they're paying for, and that their dollar amounts are being executed wisely. We want to make sure that we've taken fraud out of this, out of the equation, and we've filtered the numbers so that, when I send the media buyer a bill, he's got what he's paid for, and not have inflation built into any of the reporting.
Go ahead, Rob.
Yeah, I was just gonna mention, kind of like backing up to a higher level view of looking down on this. I think that the objective, really, how I look at it anyway, it's sure the advertising piece is important, but I think that the bigger piece is for all podcasters to really have an accurate measurement on how many people are listening to their show. I think that's the big picture. If it's not done correctly, that podcaster can get the wrong impression about the scale and reach of their show, which may have an impact on how they do the show, how they produce the show, whether or not they continue doing the show. I think what we want to really have is accurate tracking of these shows, and as that leads into an advertising model or whatever revenue model that podcaster has, having good numbers is much better, and to have everybody on the same page with that, I think, is really important.
Yeah, and I definitely had that in my notes, kind of like, what does it mean to the average podcaster? But more accurately, why does the average podcaster care, right? If they're going to determine, if we have standards and then ad rates or CPMs are going to be based on those standards, I think maybe that's part of the reason you have not quite an agreement on what is the standard. Yeah. Then, for a lot of podcasters who don't get more than 500 downloads or 2,000 downloads, they're not going to be in a CPM model. So why do they care? So I definitely want to cover that even more, and we'll come back around to that. But let's cover a little bit about the history of podcast stats, and who was first? When did you guys are so early to the game, and Blueberry is, and Libsyn is? Did you guys start counting stats from the beginning? Were you trying to count stats from the beginning?
I think we started counting stats before there was a raw voice, but we had a rudimentary tool that had been built. And then when raw voice was formed in 2005, one of our first priorities was this. We launched what is now the underlying tech of our generator, then built the stats package. But really, probably by early 2006, we were really looking at the getting a measurement number, because we were hot and heavy in advertising deals, even right in that early days of podcasting. So late 2005, early 2006, we were, at least we had a system. It may not have been as pretty as it is today, but we had the ability to get reporting back to media buyers. And
in the space, what existed before you started counting stats? Do you know?
I don't know when Libsyn started their stats. I think there was a parallel effort pretty close. Both Podtrac, Libsyn, and us were early on the scene. We'd have to ask Rob and Mark exactly when they came on board.
Sure.
It's having their data, but everyone was pretty early, and I know there was a lot of there was more discussion about stats in the early days than there even is now. But it's surprising we're still having this conversation 11 years later.
Yeah, and still not agreed upon. It doesn't appear, and with, I don't know. It seems like in general, a good job has been done, and we'll get back to that. We've got things like the IAB. I think it was called ADM, but which Rob will talk about. There are these organizations that have been working on this for a long time. But what did the early stats measure, or why did you even want to get into stats? You started a media hosting company. Why the stats?
Well, the stats were needed to because we were not a media hosting company to begin with. We were mostly doing advertising. So 80% of our business was around the advertising space. So we had to have the accuracy in being able to report back to the media buyers. And and just so that we're fair here, let's be very clear from the very, very beginning. I think that there was a level of collaboration between Libsyn, Blueberry, and Podtrack to make sure that the data was right. And I think you would have, if you'd had Rob Walsh on here right now, or if you had Mark McCurry on here right now, I think they would all say exactly the same thing, that we've all tried to play on a level playing field, at least between these three partners. Not partners, but three competitors.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it is we've learned in podcasting, it's usually in the best interest for podcasters to get along and play together. And you can usually benefit far greater than that. And I guess, with you guys working together, that certainly helped out the podcasting space up to this point. I mean, when did you see the first, well, let's talk quickly again. What were you measuring in the beginning? What was most important measurement? What were you trying to get at?
Two things: unique IPs and total downloads, and filtered downloads. So that's a very important thing. Filtered downloads meaning removing the bots, removing the stuff that shouldn't be in there. And we all really started with a script called Podalizer, and built from there. That's really kind of what built the whole.
Where did that come from?
I used to know who did it. Oh, Angelo said it was open source, so he's throwing me notes here on the side. But
yes, there's a man. I mentioned the Wizard of Oz. There literally is a man behind the curtain. You can pan the camera over, but it's Angelo, who is we got hardcore tech in the house.
Yeah.
All right, I planned this out. Not at all, but oh yeah, so that's pretty cool. So why were those two things, unique IPs, downloads? What was the importance of getting those and getting them accurate?
Well, we've always known that there's a ratio between unique IPs and total downloads, and we have done later on. We did a lot of science in being able to determine, we see unique IP once. How often are we actually going to see that second IP a second time? And if we do see it a second time on a specific episode, why have we seen it a second time? Is it valid? Can it be counted? Sometimes it can. Most of the time it cannot. So, we had to come up with rule sets. We bill on total downloads even today, but there's always this delta with unique IPs being lower than the total number of downloads. It's really not rocket science to get to the unique IP number, but it requires a lot of manipulation of logarithms and rules to come up with an accurate total download number.
And so
go ahead.
I was going to ask, I want to get whatever you're going to say, but I was going to ask, how does it differ from when you started out doing that to what it looks like today?
Well, we've had to adapt. We've had to adapt to new things that have come on the space. We've had to adapt to software failures. We've had to adapt to individuals trying to manipulate the system. We've had people that try to spoof user agents. There's just a whole bunch of variables that we have to look out for that, people, let's be frank, people will try to game any system, and the majority of people don't, but we had to plan for all contingencies.
So, and again, I'd say we weren't going to rag on sort of the public media document, but for context, they came out with this document and you've looked at it. How does it differ? Are they trying to do something different in their standard, is what they're calling it, than what you're already doing?
Well, we made a public statement on PowerPressPodcast.com of what we thought about the public radio document. I'll let that statement on that website stand as it is, but I will say that there are inherent faults in some of their methodology. I'm not going to go in and belittle their document beyond what we have done in our statement, but I would just say that we know based upon pure volume, pure experience in the space, that they got some stuff wrong, fundamentally wrong. I will say this: it's a start. It's a very minimum start to a standards document.
Okay, so hey, Rob, why don't you explain to us a little bit what's IAB, ADM? What are these acronyms?
Well, the ADM is the Association of Downloadable Media, and if we go back in time a little bit, and I think if we talk a little bit about kind of like how we got here, and kind of Todd kind of started that a little bit. But the early days of the ADM were just like Todd said. You had PodTrack and Libsyn and Blueberry all kind of collaborating in this kind of group that had been formed, and podcasters were joining and stuff. So we had we had the beginnings of a podcast association of sorts, and there was a board of directors and all this stuff, and all the players kind of got together and came up with some core concepts of a standard here, and that's really been the foundation since about 2008 going forward, actually even to where we are today. So in a lot of ways, we didn't have a big problem. From 2008 to maybe 2000, I don't know, maybe 12, 13, 14, something like that in that time range, when we started to see other players start to jump into this space, from public radio more, and wanting, their presence was growing, and we had more radio people jumping into this as well that were coming from a streaming background. And so as we kind of move into today, it's like there's principles that have existed in streaming and online radio for many years that a lot of people wanted to kind of put into podcasting, because they saw this kind of download phenomenon as like a black hole. It was like once it gets downloaded, we don't know if it ever gets played, which is in stark contrast to the streaming folks who they know everything, right? When a play starts, when it ends, and it's a linear stream and that kind of thing. But not to get too off down that track quite yet. But we didn't really have a problem in this space. Everybody was pretty much doing the same thing. But what happened was that the association broke up. The ADM kind of broke up, and I think, Todd, that was like in 2010 or something like that. Or 9. I'm not quite sure what the timing is on this, but then after that group broke up, all the companies, Libsyn and Raw Voice and
PodTrack.
Blueberry and PodTrack, they weren't collaborating as much as they used to in the early days of the ADM. And so all three of those platforms started doing their own thing to some extent, and adding capabilities, and like Todd was talking about, scanning for bots and those kind of things that the other platforms maybe weren't doing. And so we started to see a little bit of a difference between all the platforms and what the numbers started to show. And then that kind of fracture, I think, was what a lot of the new entrants into the space started to see, right, and to analyze on and say, well, metrics is out of control in this medium, and we don't know what the listenership is of the actual downloaded files. And so then they started stirring up this problem. Well, we wanted to create a new standard, and that kind of gets back to my time at Podcast One and kind of the whole online radio folks wanting to try and get rid of downloads. So Todd, go ahead.
But let's be very clear here. PodTrack, Libsyn, and Blueberry never had a problem with one another. We were talking the entire time.
Yeah.
And we each adapted as we saw trends and made changes. For example, 2006 we saw these people trying to spoof. In 2012, iOS 6 had some issues with, just a software release we had to adapt to. 2010, mobile apps, multi-part requests started to change totals, and we had to adjust to the technology as it moved forward. But let's be very, very clear, and I'm serious about this. Libsyn, PodTrack, and Blueberry have never had a problem with each other's numbers. The people that have had a problem with our numbers are the newcomers to the scene that don't like these numbers, that didn't fit their business model. Let's be very clear about that.
And that's what I'm curious about. Like, why all the criticism? Do we not have the best measurement of any media form? Now, we heard about streaming, which we're going to talk about. We're going to pin you two down because you still have this argument between you on the show all the time.
Yep.
But when we talk about live, gosh, I don't know. I don't think I want to go down that hole
Don't
yet.
use that word, because that's not.
I know it's so.
Audience.
This is
Maybe
going to
that's
get crazy.
A better word. Audience. Do we have the best way to measure the size of the audience?
And when I say we, I mean podcasting.
Yes.
Well, if you consider radio's carrying a little thing on their hip and walking around, and it's measuring what they're listening to in the radio.
Yet most of the criticism comes from traditional media formats who don't have measurement. Like, it's bogus measurement, right? So why all the criticism of our measurement and what we've done so far when we have far better system for doing it than somebody else. I mean, I want to iterate on it, but what's going on?
I keep saying the people that have trouble with, or people that have issues with measurement, are the folks that don't have measurement. And we've had many systems. We've had many people come on our system. I'm sure Rob has too. I'm sure PodTrack has too. They said, hey, we want to come in and do a test. They run a test for 30 days, and then, oh, we don't want to use your system no more because what does it not do? It doesn't fit their business model.
Right. So this goes back to ad rates and download. They want more downloads so they can charge more for ads, right? I mean, like at some point, someone's not looking out for podcasting, it sounds like, because what's the problem? I mean, I don't understand what do they want to do differently?
It's about volume. They need the volume.
Numbers.
But if your numbers aren't correct, then who cares? I mean, it's not going to matter. And if we've always sort of skirted around numbers with direct response stuff, right? With codes, like it's about engagement, right? The average podcaster can exist with a 2,000 person audience because it doesn't matter if he's got 2,000 or 5,000 downloads. People respond to the ads, which advertisers have understood to this point. They put in a code, people use it, they know they're listening.
Well, we've seen a suppression in CPMs because of. I'm just going to be straight up. There's not. Almost everyone is playing fair in the space. There's only a couple of parties that aren't, and I'll just leave it at that. But it has caused suppression of CPMs. When you're inflating numbers, it drives CPMs down, the number that they report. So. That's what it boils down to. So there is not a measurement problem in the space, but what there needs to be and what is being worked towards right now is a viable document and be agreed upon by as many players as possible to come out and say, this is what we agreed to as a group, to come out and give the space some standards to work from, so that if someone is playing outside of the wheelhouse, that they're going to have to come in line, or they're going to have to explain what they're doing differently.
So what's the current standard to measure a download? How do I know that 5 downloads is actually 5 downloads? By current standards versus what someone else wants to do. How is it by the IAB? IAB is, again, getting back to the IAB, it's part of, it's not only just Libsyn, Blueberry, PodTrack, but there's a lot more people involved in that, right? And they have established a standard. But they're working on it.
Yeah.
Okay, so what's a download by those standards?
But here's the problem, Ray. What is counted as a download, it uses a large stack of rules to say it was a download. I mean, the stack is significant of
And let me interrupt, because in the show notes there will be a link to you and Angela actually did a deep dive into how this is done at Blueberry, right?
Okay.
So because I know a lot of people are going to be watching this and they're dying right now because they want it explained, the technical aspects, they want it all explained. I assume that, Angelo, it's covered in that PowerPress deep dive you guys did, right? Because I'm going to link to that.
I just missed the first part of that. You said the PowerPress deep dive?
That you guys did.
Oh, yeah.
People are going to want to know that. Without digging into those extreme technical details, I'm going to refer people to that. But
there's so much to it. So the technical deep dive, that video that we made, was really to try to explain to people in non-technical terms, and it still got pretty technical. I'll just throw out another technical example. Somebody just released some guidelines, and it's so weak in the knees, it's crazy. We know for a fact that a lot of the user agents that come in are garbage. For example, why is Internet Explorer 3 downloading a podcast? Is that legitimate? No. Firefox 5? No, we're at what? Version 30-something? Or 44 or 42? Yeah, you can't count that stuff. So there's a lot more that goes into determining a download than just saying, 200 bytes were downloaded. Okay, it's a download. Which, especially for a lot of podcasts nowadays that put their 1400 by 1400 artwork in the MP3, well, guess what? You have to download half a mega file just to get the image downloaded first before you even get to the audio. So, yeah, there's needs to be a lot of focus on who's consuming it, trying to get that number, which is what we've always been trying to give podcasters, is saying, when you see a download in our system, that means a person actually was able to download and listen to it. It's not this is how many physical machines might have downloaded 200K or something. So it's really about putting media in someone's hands and knowing that number.
So it's really trying to figure out from computer language how many humans accessed the file. And
Exactly.
as much as we can from algorithms and such, filtering all of that out.
Yeah.
Because if a bot downloads a file, that bot is not worth anything. That bot's not going to buy anything from you or from your sponsor. A human would.
Right. You know, the interesting thing about bots too, though, is that bots doesn't account for much, but there's a lot of garbage though that's kind of in between, that it doesn't have the word bot in the user agent, but it shouldn't be counted. Like the IE3 example. IE5, IE3, Firefox 5. There's some app developers who create these systems that skin media just to get the meta information. And you can really find this out by looking at the IP, not the user agent, that it's a physical server downloading the MP3, not an actual user.
Go ahead. Dave, what questions do you have? Anything yet?
Can you explain, like, what, I think you already did, maybe this IEC, like, when you say a bot, to the average Joe person, like, what is a bot and why would people use them?
Oh, is that one for me?
Yeah.
Sure.
You're the
Yeah,
bot
so,
man.
well, obviously Google would be a good search engine. It's crawling to find content. So you don't want to count that. But there's a lot of media-based bots. Here's a really good example. And we didn't know this till January of last year, just over a year ago. People figured out they can inflate their numbers by putting a tiny URL or some kind of shrinked URL to their media file and post it on the Twitter. What was happening was Twitter has over 400 bots that crawl Twitter looking for tweets and information. And then every time a tweet is put up there that has a web link doesn't end with .mp3 or .file extension, it follows it thinking that, hey, it's another website that's related to the content on Twitter. And when they did that, they're actually following a link to a media URL. It goes in the stats and it would be counted. So when we start seeing this uptick, red lights start going off, and we did an audit and discovered all this traffic was coming from tiny URLs on Twitter, and someone was posting it once an hour on the Twitter and random places. We immediately recognized where it was coming from, the pattern involved, and smashed that out as far as being reported. And within March, April, the people that were marketing that as a technique kind of disappeared.
Yeah, Twitter bombing has, for the most part, disappeared. I still see some people doing it. I guess they just haven't gotten the memo that, hey, look at your stats again. Or maybe they think they lost their audience. Speaking of defining terms, someone in our chat wanted us to define CPM because Todd was talking about inflated CPMs and how that's affecting the market. But let's go back. What is a CPM? Someone want to explain that?
Well, go ahead, Daniel. I mean, because this is important because if you look at the chat, see, this is why live is great because you'll have people clear things up for you, right? So we didn't define CPM. Not everyone knows what that is. And it seems to be what people want to talk about in the chat. So we'll talk about it a little bit, but Daniel, tell us really simply what CPM stands for.
CPM, cost per milli, or in English, cost per thousand. So it's cost per thousand downloads. If someone says you're going to get a $10 CPM, that's $10 for every 1,000 downloads of a particular sponsored episode. So it's downloads per episode, not downloads per month. So don't think if you get 100,000 downloads per month, you'll get 100 times 10. You'll get however many your episodes you release in that month get.
Right.
And so in the podcasting space, I think the average is still pretty varied, but you'll see typically $10 to $25 per 1,000 downloads or $10 to $25 CPM. Some podcasters are getting as much as $45 CPM, but public radio is coming in at, with their inflated numbers, I think and Todd and Rob could probably speak better to this, but somewhere around like $6 or $5 CPM, what they're wanting to do. Rob, what insight can you bring to that with your radio background?
Well, I mean, I think it goes, it's a pretty wide spectrum. I've seen ad buys as low as $2 CPM. It depends on what the scale of the buy is, up to, I've heard of buys in the 60 to even $100 CPM. It depends on what the campaign was. It's very unusual to get above $25. Yeah, and it's so that's the range.
And
But on the radio side, especially when you start moving into programmatic ad buying, which is a whole nother topic, those are typically done ads placed in streaming type of playback environments, but it is moving into podcasting more and more. Those are usually buys that are made across wide numbers of shows at relatively low CPM, because they're what's called kind of remnant buys, which means that those are extra ads that are not being placed. It's like some ads that are not being, it's opportunities out there that are not being fulfilled. And so what these platforms will do is sell almost like a wholesale. It's almost like it's just trying to fill that inventory. So it can get as low as $2 CPM. It probably goes even lower than that, but nobody's going to make any money once you get much below, $5.
Well, and most podcasters aren't going to make any money anyways. I mean, I recently went and ran on this and said that, for the average podcaster, we know the median number is not above 200 downloads or something per episode. Mm-hmm. This is not where the money is if that's what you're interested in at all. Why it's interesting, the conversation is interesting to me from two perspectives. One, why that podcaster cares. So I think there's a perspective for the industry, but a lot of times, with these standardizations, these are going to probably help drive some of those CPM mm-hmm. rates. Why most podcasters care about that, I say, so what? I mean, in terms as it pertains to your show, maybe it's more important in the broader sense for the industry, but you're probably better off going out and doing your own deal and proving why a podcast is strong and powerful. You've got the 1%. It feels like a lot of these agencies, or groups are fighting over the WTFs, the serials. So what? I don't give a crap about those shows when it comes to CPMs and standards. In your face. I mean, that's not the person watching this show for sure. So, and they're not even involved in the conversation, barely. So that's not us. So again, there are two arguments, right? I guess there's one for the industry as us as a whole, as podcasters in a space, in a growing medium, and there's us for our own shows. But Todd, you look like you're itching to say something. No audio from Todd, but Rob wants to respond.
Okay, so here we go.
Oh, there we go.
Here's the challenge that Rob was talking about, the programmatic ad buying. I spent some time in New York. I went around and visited this past summer, talking with everybody about specifically this topic. I have a plan to do programmatic correctly and maintain CPM rates. It can be done mm-hmm. correctly. It's going to take a little work, but at the same time, we have to just be aware that there are going to be people out there who are going to be doing volume deals that are going to take stuff at 6. But I believe, even in the programmatic ad buying space, that there is a way to do it so that we can keep the CPM rates up and keep the podcasters fed. The problem with the rest of the world, let's talk about this East Coast bubble. They, for a better word,
lack of a better word.
No, let's be careful here. They want to fill all that inventory all the time, and it's important that they do that to keep their model fed. But at the same time, we have to remember that the podcaster is the radio station. He is the program director that's going to be deciding, yep, that ad's going to make sense for me, or no, you're got to be kidding me. You're going to pay me $6. I'm running away. So we have to remember that the individual podcasters is the radio station and making the decision. On the East Coast, they have the folks that are on this traditional model where the talent is just there to do the show. They're there to do the ad spots, but the business model, the business guys in the back room, the ones that are wearing the suits, are deciding whether or not they're going to take inventory at 6. So we have, our job, my job, Rob's job, Mark's job is to protect the 98% of the podcasters that live outside that bubble. And as shows become successful and grow, we got to protect them so that they have the ability to generate revenue when they're ready to do so. And at some point, the media buyers are going to come looking for all this inventory that's available, because you said it here a little bit earlier, Ray, that they're fighting over this 2% of content that's out there.
Yeah.
So how does this, let's tie it all back into figuring out some type of standards, right? So when it comes to podcast measurement, how does all that tie in to creating some standard that everyone agrees on that is like legit for measuring a podcast? Like, I know that Podcasters Roundtable gets 1,000 downloads per episode versus, you know, some other show, right? How do we, and everyone's going to agree upon that. Yeah, Ray, we've seen your stats at Libsyn, and you do get 1,000.
I think once a standard is actually, a new standard comes out from the IAB, everyone's going to have to say, yes, my system meets those standards, and there may be some auditing criteria at some point to prove that those systems meet that. In the end, really the true goal here is, and I think Rob will agree with me on this, the true goal is that we're all playing on the same football field. You know, we all pull our pants on and we get our cleats on and we go out there and we bang it up together, and we have we fight this out. And when we walk off the field, everyone's had an equal opportunity to make money, and everyone's been measured by the same performance standards. So that's the most important thing to me, is that we all are measured the same.
So for the average podcaster, for someone, you know, who needs stats, and they're not necessarily looking for advertising, you know, do you guys envision a point where you said there's some type of audit? Like, if I say I have 2,000, I have to prove it. You know, where do I get my stats? Where are people in the future going to be getting stats from? I mean, obviously we have a company, you know, Todd, you have a company that has stats, but you have free stats too, right? So, I mean, I think a lot of podcasters right now don't have stats at all. And most of them don't care in terms of advertising. But Rob, you kind of went over some reasons why you might want some accurate stats, right? It still tells you something about your show.
Yeah.
Right. So what should podcasters be doing now? There's no standard, but it's in terms of stats.
Well, I think that the big thing to really think about is that, I mean, let me just comment a little bit on what Todd was saying before about standards. I think what we're all talking about here is a minimum set of standards, because I think, you know, companies like Blueberry and Libsyn or other players out there are going to probably want to still add capabilities that are maybe over and above what that minimum base standard is. So there's still going to be competition in the market, I believe, around who's doing the stats better. And I think that's a big thing to keep in mind here, is that you know, the established players, the players have been around the space for a long time, or an extended period of time, that have had time to learn from their traffic, right, and to optimize their filtering and these algorithms. Those are the ones that I would trust more at this point. Going with a new platform, or a platform that's just getting into the space, and trusting their numbers is problematic. They haven't been around long enough to learn all those lessons that Angelo and Todd and Rob at Libsyn and
Feedburner's been around forever, and they have awesome stats.
Who's this?
Feedburner.
Oh, Feedburner. Well,
been around forever, so we qualified them. Huh?
Those guys don't even count in the conversation here.
I know. So, but for the person who's listening, what's the difference? What's the difference between what I'm seeing on Feedburner? It's also telling me I have subscribers, versus something I'm going to get over at Blueberry.
It's something that's maintained and being kept current with the current standards and things are going on in the space, you know. And you know, let's not just, you know, Feedburners, you know, like Rob said, they're not even a player here. But let's think about SoundCloud, Podbean, Audio Boom. None of these folks are in the discussion, yet they have stats. No one's who knows what standards they're going by? Who knows what measurement they are using, you know? And so they're starting to compete for advertising dollars on different episodes and stuff. Do we know that they even have any? Do they have a hit counter that just counts? You know, we don't know what they're doing, and I'm thinking this will force is it'll force all the players in the space are going to have to say, once the standards come out, what will then be the case is there'll be a level playing field again. Well, these companies will have to say either we comply or we don't.
Right. I was going to say, who's going to force them to do anything? Like, I mean, it's the advertisers, I guess, the people coming to them and saying, are your stats valid?
Well, exactly. It's who are the advertisers going to trust, I think, is the bottom line. And I'm not sure, Todd. I mean, that's probably a good question in the bigger picture. Is there going to be some sort of certification or that will assure those ad buyers that this particular platform is compliant?
Well, let's talk about certification. There's a couple of certification boards out there, and only the biggest companies are going to be able to afford the type of certification that some of these bigger players in the space use.
You're talking about media ratings, right?
Right.
Yeah.
That's a big. I mean, that's a big check to write annually. I mean, a big check, and most companies are not going to be able to do that. So I think what we're going to find is that there is going to have to be, what media buyers are already doing it. They're already knowing that when they talk to company A and they say, well, Johnny's show is doing 1,800 listeners per episode, they call me and we get an RFP together and we get ready to talk about Johnny's numbers, and they're like, what's Johnny's numbers? And they'll know, the deltas a little bit. So the media buyers aren't stupid at all. But I think the most important thing is really we're trying to service the podcasters to give them the best information at their fingertips about where their show's being consumed, who, where, when, and how. And that's who we'll continue to serve. The media buyers are really kind of, they get the benefit of us doing all this work.
I think one of the debates that we have here is one of the things that Rob said that begs the question, and yes, for the people out there who are wondering if I used that correctly, yes, I did. Begs the question, what is the definition of better stats? I think what we would say is better means more accurate, which probably means a smaller number. Smaller being more accurate.
Sometimes.
Yeah, because you're filtering out all the inaccurate things, so you end up with a smaller number. Whereas radio seems to think better means bigger numbers. Is that kind of our disagreement here is between podcasters and radio, is that radio thinks better means bigger?
I don't know if that's necessarily the case, and I don't know what the delta between the two is. And that would be an interesting experiment if people were willing to lay their cards out and say, okay, here's my numbers and here's yours, and how close are they? That would be an interesting experiment. I don't know if we'll ever get to that point.
You guys with Libsyn have kind of said, I mean, you guys know that your numbers pretty much match up with Libsyn's for the most part, right?
2-3%.
Yeah. So, I mean, again, who else is able to measure within 3% their medium, right? I mean, it's
I think that's really oftentimes what we're talking about, in a difference from probably the minimum standard compliance and maybe where Blueberry is as far as in the technical abilities, is we're talking maybe 2 or 3% difference. Because at some point, that base minimum standard, you're filtering against most of the situations. So, right,
I will say this: the public radio methodology, that delta won't be 2 or 3%.
Yeah. Okay. Well. Yeah. And plus, let's also say that the public radio standard that was put out. It looks like to me, Todd, and I was looking at the list of people that were involved in that. Were from the pure radio side. They were from the public radio side, not necessarily from like Gimlet or from Panoply and those kind of folks that are spinoffs from public radio. It didn't include any of those people in there.
Yeah, I mean, who are these? Who are these people really? And what's the goal? Is it just radio just wants to keep being radio online? I mean, is that the problem? I mean, and we are saying public radio, like, what are they calling themselves? And there is a differentiation between Gimlet. These are private companies. They came from public radio, but they're not public radio. So this is in general radio. Why does radio so insistent on being so different?
I don't know if they are trying to be so much different. I think they're just a little bit underinformed at this point, and the science isn't perfect. I will say this about Gimlet and Panoply too. Great companies. I have nothing nothing bad to say about those companies and what they're doing in this space. Those I've talked to both of those teams, and they're the same mindset as the majority of the community. They are very concerned about accuracy in the space, and I feel that they live up to a higher standard than many others.
Well, I guess my question is, it seems so obvious that if you give inflated numbers to an advertiser, they're going to get less of a return. Thus, that's why they want to charge less for it. That seems rather short-sighted to go down that path to go, well, that's all right, we've got the numbers. Is that, I mean, what do they say when, because obviously somebody has had to bring this up to those people. What is their answer to that? Or they just don't care because we have a certain model and it's got to fit this?
They all know.
Here's the thing that they're betting on. Direct response, you're going to have to make that person happy on direct response. He knows what he's supposed to get for a number of new customers.
Just for definition, what is direct response?
That would be go buy a product here and use this promo code.
Promo codes, yeah. What we're used to hearing in podcasts, right?
Right.
Yep.
So what is the bet is that Geico, Ford, the brands that are going to be coming on and they're going to be wanting to get exposure. It's all about the volume, folks. So at that point, the bigger the number, the better.
Even if it's not accurate.
But it's also, Todd, it's also a factor too around targeting too. Those guys want to reach an audience that's going to be more favorable to purchase whatever their product is too. So, but they also want to be reaching actual ears.
I was going to say, none of it matters if you're not actually doing those things. I don't care what the numbers say. If you're not actually reaching them. I mean,
but if you've been able to get away with counting by sixes in direct response and getting a lower CPM, then the cash cow comes when the people that come on the space that are the Tides and the Fords and the Geicos that are just looking to get exposure, counting by sixes doesn't matter to them because there's no measurement standard.
And there's a good thing you hit on right there, because I was going to say, is measuring listens and downloads, and is this the best way forward? Is direct response still the best way forward? But you just mentioned or hit on big brands who want brand awareness. They don't want direct response. You're not going to go to Coke and enter a promo code. They just want you to know about Coke all the time, right? So, but don't they still want you to want to know that 100,000 people are hearing about Coke instead of 600? If it's 600,000 people and it's not really 600,000 people, I mean, here's the thing: aren't people from our space going to be taking jobs in these positions, these ad buyers positions? Are we just waiting for the old media to just flush out, or what? Like, from people who actually know what the heck's going on because they consume this content growing up.
To some extent, I would agree with that. I think that those buyers want to get ears. They want to have impressions.
But we need real ears. So I mean, if they're counting, if it's 6 times ear, if 90% of the ears are not actual ears, they're bots, or they're just incorrectly measured stats.
I would caution people in using the word impression, and the IAB committee is steering away from using the word impression. Impression in digital media is about banner impressions. This is totally different. So I don't think we're going to end up with a standard that says impressions. It may say delivery, download. I don't, it's come full circle again. But impression is not the word to use. But
Todd, if you talk to the big brand advertisers,
the big brand advertisers, guess what? Tough. They are going to, when the IAB standard comes out, it's not going to be defined as an impression. They have to understand this is different, and this is what the document will do. Will outline the differences in the podcasting space and why it's not an impression.
Yeah. Because it's hard to let's dive into this a little bit, because I think it's important. Because I think that one of the pressure points here, coming from radio into the space, is that they're coming from a world that's all about frequency and impressions. So they've built $1 billion business around frequency and impressions, right? And these ad buyers back in New York, that's how they buy, for broadcast radio. It's all about rating points, frequency, and impressions. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to translate between those budgets that are being spent, those billions of dollars that are being spent on brand advertising in radio today, and say, okay, how can we funnel that money into podcasting. And so how do we translate this to satisfy those buyers? And to some degree, Ray, you're exactly right. It's a little bit of a generational thing here, that they need to be trained to look at this thing differently. And one of the other pressure points here, too, is the fact that there's this 10 to 20% chunk of the podcast distribution that's happening as downloads that are being downloaded to your iPhone or to your portable media player if you're still doing that, but nobody ever knows if that file was ever actually listened to.
But Rob, you're leading us astray here a little bit, and I'm going to have to take objection to that.
I understand where you're going. I'm just painting the picture here, Todd, of what we're up against.
So it's true though, and the number is not 20%. It's more like 35 or 40% that are actually downloading the actual media still. So that number hasn't.
Yeah, but Todd, are you counting that as on-demand plays?
Here we go.
Or are you talking about downloads that go directly to an iPhone and then play back later?
Hold on. Go listen to any episode of New Media Show to hear this conversation. We don't have a lot of time, and I love this conversation. I love it every time it comes up. I love to listen to you guys battle it out. But let's deal with 3 terms, and let's define them for this audience right here, right now. Streaming, what that means to podcasting, a download, and a play. I see 3 different things there. I do. Daniel, hold on. Daniel, we're going to pass this around. You guys don't. This is not your turn. Daniel, what's a stream to you when you think of it from a podcaster's point of view?
I see a stream as feeding you the data about the same speed that you're consuming it. Maybe with a little bit of buffer ahead, but it's, for the most part, it's giving it to you bite by bite as you're demanding it.
Versus a download.
A download is the whole thing downloads.
And
it's available for offline play.
Right, like as in that. So in a stream, I as a person on the other on the server side, I can tell what's going on. Where a download, I can't tell what's going on. It's gone, right? Is it gone? All right, you guys.
Okay, there's two different types of streams, and I have this conversation, especially when I talk to the radio industry. There's 2 different types of streams. There's on-demand progressive download streaming, which we've all known for years and years.
Is that play? If I go to your website and I hit the play button on your audio player, which one is that?
Most of those are going to be progressive download streams.
Okay,
but if you play, just to give you an example, if you click play on a widget player coming off of Spreaker, that's actually using IceCast technology to stream to your player.
Right, but so
actually streaming technology.
So we know that podcasts are primarily consumed in on mobile these days, right? On apps. Correct. Here's how I consume a podcast. I go into my app and I press play. I don't download anything unless I'm getting on a plane. I understand that that's not still the majority, which surprises the heck out of me. But what is that? As so many consumers are hitting play inside an app, not download or hitting play, what's happening there? Let's deal with what is happening, the majority of podcast consumption.
Same thing if you're on a website. If it's an on-demand, bite-chunked progressive stream.
Yep.
That's how that works.
What can you tell, Todd, from that file?
If I'm doing a raw log file analysis, I can tell when you started, when you stopped. I can tell if you scrubbed ahead and missed a chunk. I can put that file picture back together. I can tell when you punched out of that, when you got to your destination and stopped the play.
So that's ideal for you versus a download, right? What can you not tell what happens in a download? What do you not get from a download?
From a download, I know that went into a on-demand bucket, let's call that. But now let's back this up, because on
bad
on demand I have and this is
you cut out for
true.
a second. Wait, here I'm going to reset. Let's back that up on an on-demand. Go ahead.
Speaking of streaming.
Okay, so on on demand. So let's say you've downloaded it. You're set up. You've subscribed, and you're listening to a show on a regular basis. You're downloading it. You're playing it 2 days later. That's,
Yes.
we can't see when you've hit play. But what I can tell, based upon trending data over, let's say, a 90-day period, I can tell whether or not that audience has shifted, has changed. Because we all know that because iOS controls about 80% of the podcasting space right now, on those media files have done 100% completion on a download, I can tell that over a 90-day period, if that guy has stopped listening to that show at the 3 or 5 episode level, the application stops downloading the file. So I know over a trending period what a show is doing. I still bill the media buyer on a download, but I can tell over a 90-day window what that show is doing from show to show, from episode to episode. And is it a rough guesstimate or estimate? I don't want to say guesstimate. Is a rough estimate? Yes. But I can tell based upon a show's trending line if he's had a drop off in an audience. Some shows sure are going to trend a little higher than others. That always happens. But if you use a mean average, you can see what's going on with the show. And I still bill on downloads. It's the best metric we have.
Do you see a time or an app or something in the future that will, when I hit play from a downloaded file, meaning it's sort of offline, I'm on a plane, will at some point send back information that says, oh, hey, I played it? Or is that too invasive into privacy issues?
Unless Apple starts giving that information, nope.
Yeah. Even in a podcast app can't like report back info that was, what I mean? I mean,
they could.
It could, sure.
Yeah.
It would just be stored in a local database file on your.
Obviously, we get into privacy issues, but I always wondered why that can't happen because. Go ahead, Dave.
We'd love to have them do it.
What I think we'll see is you see this often when you install software on your computers. Is it says check mark this box to send anonymous usage data back to the company, an error reports automatically, that kind of thing. I could see someday your podcast app prompting you for that when you first use that podcast app, it says, do you wish to allow anonymous playback data to be sent back to the publishers, yes or no? For Apple to do that, Apple being the biggest player in the space, I can't really see a day that they'll do that, but I do think someday it will come, but that could be 10 years from now.
No, why not? I mean, like you said, Apple, we do that with Apple products all the time. Your stuff crashes. Do you want to send a report? I mean,
but I think Apple, since it's their ecosystem, it's not just some app someone else developed. The podcast app is in Apple's own property. I don't see Apple doing something that in that way would in some way compromise the privacy of its users, because Apple is very much an advocate of personal user privacy.
In the end, guys, this is what it's going to boil down to. We're going to have a standard that all players are going to be able to utilize to report metric data that will continue to keep the advertisers happy as they are today.
You're saying coming out of the IAB, or it's just a prediction? This
is my prediction, and in these comments like Wild Wild West, which have been egregiously unwarranted up to this point, I think what we'll find is that this argument will move to a new phase. People don't care. They don't care if it comes from an IceCast, Shoutcast, on-demand stream. They don't care if they listen to this thing on a device. They just want to listen. And in the end, that's what it boils down to. And we will be able, hopefully, to have a standard that will encompass all those situations. And for those that choose to monetize, they're going to get information be able to have information to bill their clients correctly. Hopefully some players like Rob's company will start putting out some of their data and making that open and providing information back. So I think it'll come. But here's the main thing to remember. We've been fighting this fight since 2005. We've been advocates of accurate reporting. We've been begging podcasters for years not to pump their numbers. And if we all play fair, the whole space will continue to rise together. And those billions of dollars being spent in radio are going to start trickling into the podcasting space. And there's no reason why every podcaster on the planet won't have 100% of their average inventory sold, whether or not they have 100 listeners or 10,000.
Right. And Rob, briefly, because I think that, I mean, we're wrapping it up here. That was, I think Todd may have hosted a podcast before or something, because he brought us right up to the end. I don't want to open up a new Pandora's box. This is not the New Media Show. We got to let these people go. By the way, like I said, well, I won't go into that. I'll just say that it takes me, in related to measuring actual stats, Todd, it takes me at least 3 times full all the way through to listen to New Media Show, because I get into bed, I put it in the ear, it runs, I fall asleep, it plays through, I go back, I find my spot. So if I do that over a week, if I listen 4 times, but I really only listen once, how is that measured? It is measured once? Because why? Is it an IP thing? How does it know that?
IP and user agent.
And within a certain amount of time, if I redo it, it doesn't count it? Or?
So every service has their window. The public radio folks want 24 hours. Some people want an hour. We're a little... In the end, if the system's built right, it doesn't matter. Because as long as you're looking at a big enough data set, it's still a 1.
Statistics. Okay, Rob.
Well, and if you download it, you're never going to know any of that.
Unless you just take the Podcaster Roundtable recommendation. Hey, I know Apple's listening. I know Gimlet's listening to this episode. We got big listeners here at the Roundtable. I am kidding, but...
Yeah, Ray, I just wanted to say one thing. That there has been some research done in the MP3 format and the MP4 format of being able to embed a little script in the media file itself that will actually report home. But it was never deployed in the market.
Yeah, podcast call home. I like it.
Yes.
All right, let's wrap it up. If you have any last words to add, feel free, but definitely give us a website so we can find your podcast. And I just want to thank everyone for being on another roundtable. I mean, as you can see, this topic, we could just do this for like a day straight. We could pull a Todd 24-hour podcast and probably do one topic with this crew right here and never stop. So that is good news for the roundtable. That means more content, and we'll be back. Daniel, thanks again for joining us.
Thank you. I'm Daniel J. Lewis from the audacitytopodcast.com.
Very cool. He's a pro. Dave, I get him mixed up. You're really just one co-host with 2 heads. It's really threatening, actually. It's a good thing. It's a compliment.
That's funny. I am Dave Jackson from the schoolofpodcasting.com.
Very cool. Rob Greenlee, thanks again. I think I actually have to start. I need to go back and look at the stats. Rob might be dangerously close to a T-shirt. This may be his last appearance. And if you don't know Rob, if you make 10 roundtables, you get a T-shirt, which I can't let happen.
I'm not sure I'm at 10 yet.
I know.
Sure, maybe 5.
Oh, good. Well, then maybe you got a shot.
Do you have a smaller shirt for 5?
No small. Not even. I do have stickers.
Stickers. I'll take a sticker.
All right.
That's good.
Where can we find your show?
Yeah, my name is Rob Greenlee, and I do a live show on Spreaker called the Spreaker Live Show. It's every Wednesday at 3 p.m. Pacific, 6 p.m. Eastern, and I talk about podcasting, how to be a successful podcaster, just like all the rest of these guys do. And then Todd and I do the New Media Show most every Saturday morning at 9 a.m. Pacific, and talk and fight and battle over podcast standards.
I love it. It's one of my favorite shows, for sure. You do get to peel back the curtain, and you guys, you don't really hold back, and that's what I love. And so I think
Todd doesn't, that's for sure.
Well, it's a good yin and yang. I like it. It's an Abbott Costello, whatever you want to call it. It works out very good. So definitely tune in New Media Show. It's definitely one of my favorites. And gosh, Todd, thanks for joining us once again from freezing, maybe chilly Chicago.
So yeah, check me out at geeknewscentral.com. Of course, if you want to see that deep dive that Angela and I did, and it really kind of gets into the weeds on measurement, go over to powerpresspodcast.com, and of course, definitely check Rob and I out every Saturday on that New Media Show where we have a lot of fun.
Yeah, and look for the Battle Royale Podcasters Roundtable versus New Media Show. We're going to fill up the Las Vegas Hilton. I don't know if that probably doesn't even exist anymore. Showing my age a little bit, but it's going to be a great time. We're going to sell tickets. That's how we're going to monetize this show.
Hey, that's a good idea, Ray. At Podcast Movement, we should do a New Media Show versus Podcast Roundtable kind
there you go.
live event.
It doesn't even have to be official. We just set a recorder down in the middle of the room and go crazy. Matter of fact, we should crash another session, maybe Daniel's. All right. Well, thanks to the chat. Elsie Escobar, you know her from the feed and Libsyn. She was there. She says, thank you, Ray, for this. It was super fun. It's always super fun to have Elsie around. I'm noticing all these Snapchat avatars. It's getting big, people. Find us on Snapchat. Nope, not yet. I don't have a Snapchat avatar. But we had all kinds of people. I mean, Emily, Richard Gunther, thanks so much. Good questions. Mike Dell, Blueberry guy. In fact, no, he's not in Chicago with you guys. So he's not that far from you, though. And who else chimed in? We got lots of people. All right, it's not that many people, but Jessica, thanks. Kufferman. I'm bad with names. Jessica's awesome. She created an awesome resource. Speaking of this, I'm gonna put it in the show notes. She created an awesome resource that gives you some insight for what I've been saying, the average podcaster, right? If you're not getting the 100,000 downloads, what can you do? How do you have this conversation? Even Blueberry has a great document about how to approach advertisers. Check that out. Now I'm just adding stuff that I'm going to have to go back and listen to and add to the show notes. But all right, you guys, Podcasters Roundtable, round 66. Todd was waving early. We're out of here. Wave goodbye, everybody. Thanks again. See ya.